Hello everyone and welcome to week 12 with UQCS. So today we do have a very special presentation by Harold, who is an alumni here at UQ. So he spent a lot of time recruiting software engineers, and so yeah, he's going to share with us some of his wisdom around hacking the job search today. So yeah, I'll leave it over to Harold.
It's alright, you don't have to clap, it feels weird, don't worry. Thank you, thanks for having me. Man, it's been a while since I did one of these. I mean, the last time I was here, Corona was like just what you had on a Friday night if you felt like being fancy with friends, so it's been a while. Today I want to have a bit of a conversation around hacking the job search and everything that encompasses, everything from resumes and interviews and all that sort of stuff. So I'll talk a bit more. But before I jump into it, who here in the room is like second year or later? Okay, cool. I just want to get a bit of sense. So before I jump into the actual content of the talk, who am I and why should you actually bother listening to me? Did anyone actually look into who I am, my background, what I do for a living before today? Cool, all right, I didn't actually expect anyone to do that. So this is me. This is a slightly HTML altered version of my LinkedIn profile. So without going into the gist of it, so I work at a company called BlackRock. We are a recruitment company that specializes in all things IT, tech, development, specifically within the Queensland market. So I've been doing this for 7 years. For anyone who doesn't know what a recruitment consultant do, so basically I work with businesses, everyone from 5-person startups all the way through to ASX 50 listed enterprises, and our team helps them hire all sorts of people, engineers, designers, so on and so forth. So as part of that, we obviously are working with candidates as well to kind of help that match happen. So yeah, that's a bit about me as far as my background. So my specialty in particular has been focused on software engineering in the last 7 years, specifically within all things Java, JVM, and .NET in Queensland. So to just jump straight into it, first part of the job search, the first kind of piece of outbound is going to be resumes and whatnot. Has everyone, just to get a bit of a show of hands, has everyone in this room had a crack at doing their first resume already so far? Cool. So what I'll do is I actually got a redacted resume from a past alumni here. It's essentially a version of his resume that's fairly representative of what I would expect as from an undergrad / grad / junior level candidate. To give you a bit of an idea, day to day, the average consultant at BlackRock is looking at anywhere from 40 to maybe 60 resumes a day. So over time, we've built up a pretty good volume of, traffic and whatnot through this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it up on the screen, and there's going to be a few talking points I'm going to run through. I haven't actually looked at this in detail before, so I'm also going to do a bit of a just live reaction / roast of this resume. So Logan's resume, I'll start from the very top. Some of these talking points and just sort of touch on some of these talking points. I'll touch on some of the stuff that jumps out at me. Some of the do's, one or two of the do nots, I can see immediately as well. And we can just kind of break it down from there. So at the very top, I see this a fair bit. There's this kind of this about me section, a couple of dot points. They're sort of tailored towards who you are and whatnot, but they speak to a little bit more just kind of general sort of personality traits almost and that kind of stuff. What I would generally say is try and stay away from things like saying that you're a good team player and that kind of thing. Saying that kind of stuff just doesn't really it's one of those things where it's if you have to say it, it probably shouldn't need to be said, and it's almost just it's not giving a whole lot of value. What I will say though is that this first section it's quite helpful and it's quite valuable because it's probably one of the few spaces on your resume where it's a chance for you to speak about yourself in kind of more broad overarching terms and where it feels where you have a chance to just sort of touch on some of your key interests, maybe a little bit about, I don't know, things that you're particularly interested in, or things that you're looking for, before you dive into the more, I guess, objective parts of your experience, your work history and that kind of stuff. And so when I say keep it specific and maximize the opportunity, that's what I'm speaking about. Like trying to avoid these sort of vague-ish, subjective statements, and try and stick to things that I guess speak to a little bit more about what it is that you're going to be looking for and what you're interested in. Leading on from that, so in terms of interests and whatnot, especially at the junior level, I would say the vast majority of employers, they kind of understand that you're not going to be bringing a whole lot of experience, and that's okay. We're not really necessarily looking for that. What we are interested in is just getting a bit of a feel as far as your interest and what you're particularly motivated to do. And so some of the things that Logan sort of touched on is he was part of GovHack back in the day. He's been part of, I imagine that's a Capture the Flag challenge. He won the Paul Gamp Award for an open source project, I imagine, while he was at uni. That sort of stuff. That sort of stuff is all really, really, really helpful. I know it's a bit of a trope at this point. So people speak about, hey, well, when you're in uni, people are really interested in about extracurriculars. At the end of the day, it does really help and make a difference. As much to just, I guess, sort of give a bit of an indicator as far as things that you're interested in, as it is about just seeing that you're putting in that, I guess, extra effort to just kind of get involved and do stuff. Skills, technologies, that sort of thing. So as part of Logan's experience, kind of lumped it in there, that sort of line about languages and whatnot. This is really common. One of the most common, I think, pitfalls that I see in more so senior engineering level candidates is that they almost kind of accumulate this library of experience as they work, and it sort of ends up being this big ballooned word cloud of every technology, programming language, framework, etc. that they've ever worked with, which for me, when I first look at it, isn't massively helpful. I appreciate the fact that people have sort of worked with all sorts of stuff. What I'm really kind of keen to see as a first impression is A, what it is that you're really interested in, and B, what it is that you're most familiar and comfortable with. Which at the student level, it's really kind of similar as well. We see people who sort of come out, whether they're still studying or whether they've immediately graduated, they speak to some of the programming languages and whatnot they've obviously learned over the course of their studies. And that can be quite broad, which is great. But what I found really helps the most standout candidates at the sort of undergrad and grad level is people who've already got a bit of an idea as to what their interests are going to be. Whether it's sort of they want to work at as a firmware engineer, whether they're really keen on working in UI UX, whatever it is. They've got a clear idea of what that is. They've probably invested some time over their course of their studies already sort of trying that kind of stuff out, which leads into them sort of being able to kind of tailor their skill sets and experiences towards things that are relevant for whatever it is that's interested in. Hopefully that makes sense. This concept of channeling the technologies and skills that you highlight towards the job that you're ultimately wanting to get or that you're applying for. Sort of related to that as well is the experience section. So in Logan's case, there's not a lot of work experience here, but what he does speak about is some of the, I guess, bits of work that he's done over the course of some of his involvement in some of these extracurriculars and whatnot. There's a bit of a prototype here that I think he might have done for a hackathon at one point and whatnot. Which is great. The things that he speaks about they're quite concise. They are quite of substance, of measurable as well. He speaks to things that he sort of directly contributed to, what it is the app did, that kind of stuff. What I would have really loved to have seen here though, which he didn't put in, is being able to sort of tie that set of languages and experiences that he's alluded to those experiences. A lot of the times, especially as you gather more experience over time, you'll sort of build up that catalog of skills and technologies and whatnot. But when you're looking at someone's work history, it's really hard to actually figure out how much time they've spent with each of those technologies. Just because someone's listed, I don't know, Scala on their CV, for example, and they've been working for 10 years, it's really hard to differentiate at a glance whether that's, they've been using Scala for the last 4 years in, a production code base, or whether it was some, prototype project they spent 2 weeks on at a job, 3 years ago. Which is why I think it's really helpful that when you're building out this experience section, whatever that experience might be, if you have that sort of, that skill section of technologies and whatnot as well, it's helpful to associate those two things together, and that way the reader can immediately get a sense of like, what have you used, how long have you used it for, what did you use it for, that kind of thing. And the last thing, which I get is quite common, again, especially at the more junior end of people and their experiences, is this, I don't want to say obsession, but there's this kind of anxiety about the length of my resume. How long should it be? Should I make sure it's, there's no reason to go above a page, so on and so forth. Logan in this case is kept it to a page, which I think is fine. I think if you're able to speak to and elaborate on your experience in a way which is succinct to the point, but there's enough detail there's nothing wrong about it being a page. Like, there's no point in sort of padding it out just for the sake of padding it out. And if anything, that can actually be counterproductive because it really ruins the UX for the reader in terms of actually trying to find the information they're looking for. What I will say is also, though, is that think twice. If you're getting to the point where it's like 2-3 pages as well, there's a real chance here that you have probably been a little bit too generous with your words. So that's why I speak to the fact that, like, don't be obsessed about sort of just trimming it down to one page, getting down to like size 6 font just for the sake of cramming it down to one page, but at the same time, think twice if you're finding it getting too long. I'll do a general Q&A at the end, but when it comes to resumes in general, does anyone have any questions so far? Sure.
How much does the degree you do matter? Like, for example, what's the difference between doing like computer science or software engineering?
It's a good question. In my experience, I find that it matters very, very little. There are going to be some jobs where, as part of maybe the screening process in general, or maybe it's actually related to the job itself, where there is going to be some kind of reliance on, I don't know, computer science stuff, algorithms, space-time complexity, that kind of stuff, which you might be better prepared for going with one degree or another. But from a, I don't know, credibility, first impression standpoint, like, to be honest, I can't remember at the time when I actually paid attention to whether it was comp sci, software engineering. GPA, like, at a glance, maybe, but even that, it's more of a point of interest as opposed to like, oh hey, this person's got less than a 5.5, not interested. Any other questions on the resume stuff? Yes.
Yeah, how important are like extracurriculars in the resume? Is that?
Honestly, pretty important. The thing is while you have limited working experience, there's not a whole lot else to really kind of not even just assess you on, but just even get a first impression on. From what we do as well, and I imagine for a lot of businesses in general, the volume of applicants that we can get sometimes is, I mean, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it can also be quite a bit, and that signal to noise ratio can be quite off. So I wouldn't say you're going to be really disqualified by a lack of extracurriculars, but having them will up your chances immediately, and that immediately kind of differentiates you above the noise by quite a bit. So yeah. Was there one more question? No? Yes?
Would you recommend putting in like coursework projects or like lesson projects in lesson?
Generally speaking, I would. I will put an asterisk on that and say, like, if it's a to-do app that you hack together in a day and a half, maybe not. Which is a pretty common thing that I see, to be honest with you. Like, as much as having it is great and appreciated, it also doesn't really give a whole lot of signal in terms of like, if I just see, a bunch of, like, again, I personally wouldn't disqualify a whole bunch of just small toy pet projects, but the reality is it still doesn't also tell me a lot. Like I kind of have probably similar selection of stuff from my own personal, you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't really help me a lot. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I will say though that when speaking on the sort of interests, extracurriculars and that kind of stuff, Logan as a junior with a GitHub on his resume, I'm immediately like, he's probably going to get a phone call from me just to kind of suss out what he's about.
What is your opinion on multiple column resumes and how these things?
When you say multiple columns, as in just having like your experience like literally formatted into columns, or?
Well, for I think like automated resume reading purposes, apparently it's better to have it in just like the one block.
Oh,
But
right.
some stylists typically nice resumes have like a separate side column.
Right, yeah, I get you. Look, I can't speak for the FANGs of the world. I don't know what their like resume screening software does, if it's even a thing. In my experience, and out of all the clients that I've worked with, I've actually never encountered one who used some kind of automated CV screening software. So, look, at the end of the day, I do believe in catering for the lowest common denominator. So, I mean, if you want to play it safe, absolutely one column, just keep it to a design similar to this, and you can't go wrong. But I've yet to encounter anything that actually would disadvantage you by having a bit of a fancier resume. That was. Cool, I'll move on, unless... Yes, one more.
Quick question. What if you had extracurriculars in high school? For example, if you done like a certain subject or you got a distinction in stuff like music related stuff, would you put that stuff in, or if like top the cohort, would you put that in?
As in like from high school?
Yeah, but only in like the seniors, like the grade 12, like what sort of
Right.
grades you got?
Candidly, probably not. Like it won't really do much for me personally, looking at it. Like in the same way that once you get to university, like no one really cares what your OP was. Kind of similar, not a whole lot of relevance.
Okay.
Cool. So the next thing, interviews. To kind of wrap up the piece around resumes. Resumes at the end of the day, like they're your first impression. They help provide context in your experience and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, its utility is in actually getting you the interview, getting you in the door. Once you're actually in the door, the CV is completely irrelevant. It's all about how things go in the room. So I'm going to talk through a few points which are pulled directly from our interview prep emails that we send out to candidates and whatnot as part of the interview process, and I'll just run through them one at a time. So the first one is preparation and do your research. I know it seems obvious, straightforward and whatnot. The number of times when I've personally interviewed people for a job at BlackRock and they've walked in and have very little understanding of what it is we actually do is way too high. The number of times when I've walked into a client for the first time and the first question they ask me is, what do I know about the business, is pretty common. So not to say you have to go digging into the founder's history and all that kind of stuff, but it helps you have a general understanding of what it is the business does. If you're able to ahead of time find out who's going to be interviewing you, it helps to just have a quick peek, especially on the off chance that you actually have a shared interest with them. Like it never hurts. Maybe it's almost to a point of just common courtesy. It helps just have a bit of background on sort of who you're going to be speaking to. If a company has actually given you some things to prepare for, materials, example questions, anything like that ahead of the interview, actually check that stuff out. Again, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer, but people do ignore that stuff just because they can't be bothered or whatever. It actually does make a difference. It is super important. It's there for a reason. Acknowledge your limits, especially with more technical interviews. We have candidates sometimes who, when they're speaking about a topic where they're just not familiar with it, I think whether it's because of nerves or whatever it is, it's really easy to feel like you have to give some kind of answer, you have to force it out, you have to just keep trying to talk your way around and whatnot. I generally find it's not really helpful to do that. Like if you acknowledge up front that you've just kind of reached the boundaries of your knowledge, I think most good interviewers will respect that. as long as you then try and continue the conversation and speak to, how it is you might go finding a solution, or, hey, I don't have any experience with that particular topic, or I haven't have any experience with it, but I'm guessing it's kind of similar to this other thing that I do have some knowledge of, so on and so forth. So don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something, because oftentimes people respect that you're ready to admit it. And a lot of the times we find that once people actually get into a job, one of the biggest hurdles to someone actually getting up to speed is someone who's opposed to actually admitting their stuff and they need help. Which leads me to this idea of showing you're working, talk through your thoughts. Again, when it comes to technical interviews especially, we've seen this happen with companies that run, whiteboard coding exercises, all that kind of stuff as well. It's like high school math, you get marks for getting the right answer, but you also get marks for showing you're working. And especially if you get stuck, don't be afraid to just sort of talk through how you might go about finding a solution, what's going through your head, what are you stuck on, that sort of stuff. Just talk through it. I do have one more point on the back of this, but I wanted to kind of speak a little bit more time on it. So just on these 3 points, did anyone have any questions around some of the stuff when it comes to these? Cool, sweet. So I dedicated one entire slide to this concept, the fact that the people interviewing you want you to be successful. A really, really respected consultant that I met a couple of years ago kind of spoke to the fact that he runs into the situation with people that he's interviewing where they really get nervous because they feel like this interview is like this adversarial situation, and they feel like it's the other person is trying to prove you wrong and that kind of stuff, which for him and a lot of interviews is really not the purpose. Like for me personally, if I could meet one person and that's the person that gets hired, like happy days, it's a win-win. Always remember that the person who's interviewing you wants you to be the person that they hire. It feels like a simple concept, but I find that if you keep that in mind, it really helps just kind of ease some of the tension, the anxiety that comes about through the interview process. And along with that, just remember, like, it's not a test. The point of these interviews is oftentimes to try and understand what your experience is, what you're comfortable with, what do you maybe have a little bit more time to kind of learn on, what it is you're interested in, and make sure that the job that you're interviewing for is the right fit. It's not intended to be a test. If it's a good interviewer, they're there to have an exploratory conversation to kind of understand who you are, what you're about, tell you a little bit more about them, the company, and make sure the fit is right. Any questions? Cool. Sweet. So those are just some, I guess, talking points that have come up over the course of my work experience on the resume front. That advice I find myself giving a lot. It also echoes a lot of the I guess strong points in some of the best resume templates that I've seen floating around. And in terms of the interview advice, this really echoes some of the key things that we dedicate a lot of time to preparing our candidates for, but it also highlights some of the key areas in which I've seen candidates fail interview processes because of. And so, heading into this, what can you do right now to help improve your roles? What is some of the stuff which is really actionable? The first point, and it's something that I actually had to learn maybe a year or two into my career, is that software development is ultimately a team sport. I think a lot of the time, especially earlier on, people really kind of hone in on this idea of understanding how to solve really, really hard challenges, scaling issues, and that sort of stuff. When in reality, one of the key things you're lacking when you first graduate is experience working in a commercial software development environment, is having that experience of working in a cross-functional team where you have, developers, designers, business analysts, so on and so forth, technical, non-technical people, and having familiarity with how those workflows happen, what are the common things that people get stuck on, gaps in communication, how do you work with both technical and non-technical people, how do you turn what a business stakeholder is looking for into a specification that a developer can then actually, just some of those nuances. A lot of the times what we see from clients who hire junior developers is that the technical aspects of their experience, those tend to sort of grow with time, with appropriate coaching, as long as you have the right attitude of just being interested in learning and being open-minded. Some of the more common shortfalls is just that you're not used to working in that team environment. And as far as what you can do right now, finding ways to kind of get exposure to that environment is going to go a long way, and it also kind of comes off the back of some of those extracurriculars that I spoke about. So hackathons are probably one of the biggest ones as well. I know there's a couple that run throughout the year. I'd really spend a little bit of time trying to find some of the ones that happen and trying to get involved with those, because they're having been in a couple myself, I find they're a really good encapsulation of what a software development lifecycle looks like, concentrated into a span of a few days. And once you run a few of those, you'll get a real sense of what it's actually like working essentially in a live file software development team. The other one is getting involved in open source projects. Chances are, well, I know for a fact, a lot of these industry standard tools, frameworks, libraries and whatnot, React, Django, picky poison. A lot of the stuff is open source, which means that you can get involved with it in your own time. I know it feels like it can be pretty daunting for you right now to get involved in some massively used open source library, but a lot of that stuff is like, the contributors to them still need help with proofreading docs and all that kind of stuff as well. A couple of years ago, I had someone reach out to me who was a practicing lawyer at the time, who really wanted to make a career shift into being a software developer. And so I gave him this advice, being like, hey, look at some of the apps and whatnot that you're using in your own day-to-day life. Chances are one of them is open source. Maybe you can find a way to actually get involved in one of those and just go from there, apart from just your learnings and whatnot about coding. And about 6 months later, he reached back out to me, and I was kind of like, oh, hey, what's going on? How's the search going? And he's like, funny story. So 2 weeks after we had that conversation, he was having a look, and it turned out that the password manager that he used was open source. So he got on the GitHub repo and just, sort of got chatting with the contributors. He sort of, volunteered some of his time to kind of help them with just some really minor stuff. And 6 months later, one of them was kind of like, hey, I don't know, what you're doing for work at the moment, but would you be interested in essentially, working with us full time and joining us as a junior engineer? And now he works as a developer, contributing to Bitwarden, which actually happens to be my personal password manager. So yeah, this isn't me just saying stuff. This actually does work in real life. I've seen people make radical career changes off the back of it. The next point is find ways to socialize with experience as well. I find that within the academic kind of environment, you kind of get limited chances to actually socialize with real life practicing software developers, which in some ways can kind of limit your visibility over what's out there in the world, and it means that you end up just thinking about what's put in front of you. So things like getting out to some of the meetups, for example, the Brisbane JavaScript meetup, Brisbane React meetup, whatever it is you're interested in, chances are there's a meetup for it at meetup.com. I really encourage you to get out there and get involved in them. It's going to be pretty daunting rocking up to a room full of strangers and professional software developers. Trust me, I found it really daunting, and sometimes I still do. So if you're able to get a group, find a couple of people, go along with you. Because some of the talks that are given in these are actually really interesting, kind of giving you some insights into what are some of the real life projects that people are doing out there in the world. Sometimes it can kind of give you a bit of insight into what's happening in the bleeding edge of library frameworks, whatever. But it'll also give you a chance to speak to people who are professional software developers. It'll give you a chance to learn about what it is to actually do for a living, what it's actually like. Maybe you'll be able to find yourself a mentor to help you along, answer questions for you as you go along. So I really encourage you to find ways to kind of get out there and socialize with professional software developers. And the last point is to start now. the sooner you do it, the sooner you can actually start building up a bit of a body of work and of evidence on this kind of stuff. A lot of these things as well, whether it's getting involved in, in hackathons, open source projects, meetups and whatnot, they're quite daunting when you first start out. Whether for the social aspect, or it could be a timing thing as well. Like, hackathons only run at certain times of the year, so the earlier you start, the more chances you'll have. So whether you're in your final year of uni, or whether you're literally just starting out, good time like the present to get started. Cool. So, does anyone have any questions on any of these thoughts, concepts? No. Happy days. Well, that's kind of it. That's all I had as far as actual structured content. I can roll into just a bit of more of a general Q&A now if people had any questions at all related to looking for a job as a software engineer, interviewing, what recruiters do. Sure, yeah.
How would you approach not hearing back from, let's say, after an interview or after a firm interview?
Right. That's a tough one. Yeah, it depends. It depends on the company, to be honest with you. One of the reasons, one of the benefits I think of working with smaller businesses is that oftentimes you can deal with someone who maybe has a bit more involvement end to end in the process. So if you're interviewing with some local startup or whatever, chances are you can just reach back out and just follow up. I would recommend against pestering people and just poking them over and over again, be like, hey. But at the end of the day, reaching out a couple of days after the interview, you haven't heard back, but hey, I'm really, really interested. Just wondering, if there's any feedback. Nothing wrong with that. As far as larger businesses go, if you have a point of contact, there's absolutely no harm in just reaching back out and say hello. Again, hey, follow up. Hey, has there been any feedback? But oftentimes it can be quite challenging, and you sort of have to just roll with it, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So context, I'm in UX, so it might not necessarily apply to software dev. So I have a lot of experience in a similar industry, but not necessarily UX. And I'm considering putting that on my resume, but I don't feel that it's directly relevant to what I'm trying to go for in regards to UX. Thoughts, Perez?
Sorry, can you run that by me again?
I have a lot of experience in a different field, and I'm wondering if I should at all put that on my resume, considering I want to look for jobs and internships within UX, but... Yeah,
gotcha, okay. Is there any kind of relevance crossover at all, or are we talking what's hard left?
If you count working with people with disabilities and then looking at accessibility-minded UX jobs, yes?
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. I think it is. At the end of the day, I think some data is preferable over just a lack of data in general. With that being said, if you're able to, through your own time, whatever it is, build up a body of evidence that's more relevant for what you're trying to get into as well, I think that's going to do
That's it.
much more good. Yeah. I'll put it out there and just ask the room in general. Show of hands right now for anyone who's actively looking for a job, whether it's an internship, that program, anything like that. Okay, cool. Feel free to speak up, whoever. But how did you go about deciding who you were going to apply to? And it's okay if the answer is just, I saw an ad and I wanted to apply.
I'll chime in.
Yep.
For me, in my personal circumstances, it comes down to the culture that I know of the workplace. that to me is a big value thing in regards to how they'll treat me and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
How do you go about gathering information on that stuff? Is it sort of, trying to see if you know anyone that works there? Is it like a Glassdoor thing?
So a lot of companies tend to do indexes of such as the Diversity Australia Disability, Australian Network Disability, and I think ABBI, which is Brown Diversity. So they do a lot of diversity benchmarking, which can at least indicate to me, okay, yeah, you at least have my team, and you're showing some insight, and also checking with my other network, with those that work in the field of, have you had any experience with them, what they like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. One of the, I guess, other benefits of some of the things I spoke to around, starting early, getting out there and socializing is it'll help broaden your scope and visibility of options for you. I find that the internet can be really dominated and really noisy, and oftentimes you'll find there's a lot of opportunities literally right in front of you that just fall between the gaps. One of the most common things that I tell a lot of clients, both prospective and current, is that hiring is first and foremost a marketing problem, and a lot of businesses are just don't do a great job of actually getting their name out in front of people to make them aware that they are hiring. And so if you're able to take the initiative into your own hands and put yourself into settings where maybe those businesses have people present, some kind of presence involved in it at all, that'll help you get exposure to them. Yeah.
I guess, do you have any tips on finding internships? Because I found that like last year, it turns out, oh, this company had an internship and I should have applied last year, but I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on finding these internships?
Right. Yeah, gotcha. Just so we're on the same page, is there any particular is there any kind of hours requirement or anything like that that's related to internships specifically, or are you using that just as kind of an analog for, I don't know, part-time involvement in work or something like that?
Just more like the summer internships, the 3 month. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, no, never mind, that's all right.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. So as far as formal internship programs, right, to be honest, generally businesses that have them will make a pretty solid effort of advertising them. So if they're around, you should be able to find them reasonably okay. As an alternative, what I would recommend, and again, this could be a little bit out there, is that if you put yourself in a position where you're meeting people, if you're coming across businesses over the course of doing some of this extracurricular stuff, there's nothing getting in the way of you actually just asking them for a job, in a part-time capacity. I know plenty of UQCS alumni actually who are just over the course of doing whatever, ex-sponsors, that kind of stuff, just kind of ended up asking them and be like, hey, I'm actually really interested in the work that you guys do. I've got time during the week, during the year, whatever, is there an opportunity here for me to just kind of get involved and get around? Yeah. If they say no, then no harm, no foul, but who knows, maybe there is. So, yeah, again, it's one of those things which is contingent on you actually knowing who to ask, and to do that, you have to put yourself out there. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on negotiating once you've kind of reached a position that you're able to do that?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, actually. Oh man, where do I start with negotiating? Look, I'll start off in saying that with negotiating, the person who's more prepared to walk away will generally win. So the biggest negotiation tip I can give to anyone is to have other options on the table. So yeah, if you have one offer on the table and that you really, really want it, you don't have a whole lot of leverage, What I will say though is that going into a negotiation is I would be really clear with yourself in terms of, let's say if we're talking over numbers and whatnot, be really clear with yourself in terms of how much do you want this, and is there a number where, look, at the end of the day, there's probably always going to be someone out there that can offer you more, but is there a number that this company can offer you where you're happy with that, and anything on top you're kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever, but I'm happy with what I got? And is there a number where if they don't reach that, you are a hard no no matter what? And so it's kind of like buying anything, to be honest with you, is that if you have those two kind of numbers in mind, if you're really clear on how much you want it, and at one point you're prepared to walk away just in a vacuum, no matter what, then you'll have some pretty clear ground rules and guidelines to play with. Hopefully help.